Hello, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Lessons from Papa's House. My name, for the purposes of online, is Mr. Jackson. And I'm going to tell you guys what my channel is going to be about. So, a little background about me. I was raised by my grandparents. I was an 80s baby. My parents had me very young. My parents were 16 and 19, which you'd be surprised to know that back then you could get married in California if the guy was 18 and the woman was 16, as long as your parents signed off on it. So my parents met at a theme park and fell in love and had little old me and got married. My dad was a Marine and my mom obviously was still a high school student. And they were typical teenage parents. My dad became a truck driver after he got out of the Marines, and my mom just stayed at home with me, was trying her best to get through school and all of that. There's a lot more to that story, but just wanted to give you some background. We'll get more into that stuff a little later on, I think. But anyways, long story short, by the age of 12, my grandparents were always around. They were always very, very super involved, right? And they were great. They were your typical 50s couple. They met in high school at church. They were together for over 50 years, and I think they were married for 48 years before my grandmother passed. My papa is still around. He's kicking it on his 5 acres out in Arkansas. Grew up very rural. Well, let me start with the beginning. This was in California, where they were helping out with me. They ended up retiring. My grandpa worked as a computer engineer for his whole career. I think it was 34 years. And my grandmother was originally from Arkansas, and that's where her mother was, my great-grandma, who I knew very well and was an amazing lady, and more stories about her to come. And my grandparents, they went out there to take care of her after she had a fall, and my grandpa and grandma just fell in love with it. And it was very small town. Like, where they live is like 50 people in the whole town, and 42 of them are members of the church and will be there on Sunday. And so they just liked that vibe. It was slow. They had already raised all their kids, and they were just ready to relax, and then that's where my great grandma was from. So they were just like, hey, let's sit down and and just retire and chill out and take care of mom. And so that's what they did. And then a few years later, I moved out there with them. Definitely explain to you guys, if you want to hear more about that later on, we could get into that. And out there I was raised very traditional, Southern Baptist. We went to church twice on Sunday, Wednesday, and then once a month we had men's breakfast on Saturday. I went to church camp. I did mission trips. I did vacation Bible school every year, whether it was me being one of the kids or later on me being one of the older kids that helped out. Same with camp. I was, a parishioner for many years, and then I was a counselor for a couple of years while I was in college. And it was a great way to grow up. I loved growing up in a small town. There was like maybe 150 kids in my high school, and that's including the junior high. So, I mean, it's very small. It was a little awkward for me, obviously, because here I am, this California skater kid with the baggy pants, and all the kids are more, country music, boots, lifted trucks, all those kinds of things, hunting. I'd never been hunting before. But Um, you know, all the kids were super nice, and I knew a couple of them because I had spent summers there before I actually moved there full time. So I knew a couple of the kids and really enjoyed uh, being there and got to know the kids. I didn't have a lot of friends the first couple of years I was there, but eventually I got more through like youth group and things like that. That was also, you meet other kids throughout the towns. We'd have youth rallies and things like that. But, anyways, I digress. It's very, very wholesome. Um, I wouldn't call it strict. My grandparents weren't strict. They were really easygoing with us. They actually were they were just, if you respected the rules, you got a lot of privileges. So, I can give you some examples of that later. But, anyways, the whole purpose of my channel is that I learned from my grandparents had a great relationship, like an amazing relationship. Like, they one of those, you hear about it and you're just like, what, does that really exist? Yes, my grandparents were super in love and still always just holding hands and being kind to each other, being respectful to each other, taking care of each other every single day. If my grandpa needed something, my grandma made sure that he had it. My grandma got up for 30 years, making sure that his suit was pressed and his tie was laid out and everything he needed for his workday was ready to go. And she saw that as her duty because he afforded her a life where she got to be a stay-at-home mom. And she worked for the first couple years they were married, but I don't think she worked for like 20 straight years or so. She did work when I was a little kid, so um, maybe it was 15 years. But anyway, she always was very grateful, and both my grandparents, excuse me, were very grateful to have each other. And so, but they also they were a 50s couple. They had their masculine and feminine roles, and they abided by that. They also, always made sure that they had time away from the kids. They used to like to go to Catalina when they lived in California. They would just go out to the island, and not any big vacation stuff you see on Instagram nowadays. They would literally just go there, get a nice hotel on the beach, and just walk the beach and just talk to each other. All the stuff that they felt like they couldn't do with the busyness of the kids and all that, they would just go do that stuff and they would just go talk. And so I've noticed this conundrum that we have in modern day dating and marriage, which is that people either lean as far as they can into gender roles and they end up, online cosplaying, the trad life, which I've lived the trad life, so you're not going to tell me anything about it. It's not all sundresses and baking bread, but I also don't agree with the other side of the other end of that spectrum, rather, where it's, polyamory or, giving up on relationships when there's really not like a reason to. There's just like some problems that are pretty solvable. I think the way I've always characterized that is my grandparents taught me relationship skills. And those are some of the things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about how we can have gender roles still, but they don't have to be as strict as people make them sound. And basically, I want to integrate all the things that I've learned from my grandparents on how to have a great relationship and what those things mean to me, and integrate it in a modern society. Because I know a lot of people are going to say that. A lot of people go, "Oh, Chris, we have iPhones now. We have electric cars, and they didn't have that back in the 50s." And then there's also this stupid narrative that, all the women were oppressed in the 50s and all the men were wife beaters and alcoholics and abusers. And let me tell you, if my grandma were around and you were to tell her that being a housewife for her whole life was oppressive, she would laugh at you. She would think that was the most hilarious thing that she's ever heard in her life, because she saw it as a great privilege and a great honor. And my grandfather thought the same way. He thought he felt like he got to go to his job and do what he loved, and she, handled the other stuff for him. So they really were like just the world's greatest team that I've ever seen. And so I want to share stories with you guys about that. I want to talk about that. And again, I want to take things sort of issue by issue and address misconceptions, but also address realities, that, like I said, I think the trad cosplayers tend to exaggerate what marriage really looks like and what having a good relationship really looks like. And I also think that the, we'll call it the free love side or whatever you want to call it. I think that they have a formula to achieve maximum short-term satisfaction, but it seems like the long-term thing, they don't really seem to master it. So anyways, stay tuned for more. We're going to have a lot more going on. I'm going to try to upload, maybe 2 or 3 shorts a week and a couple of videos. They're all going to be like this. They're going to be between 10 to 20 minutes long. I'll make some shorter ones. You guys just give me feedback on what you like, what you want to hear about. We're going to be doing story times where I just tell a particular story or a story/joke that maybe my papa or my granny told me about, or even that I saw that I was a part of, right? Because I was basically their kid when I was in junior high and high school. And so I had a front row seat to some of those very stories. So we're going to be sharing stories. We're going to be talking about, country living versus city living. We're going to be talking about, marriage versus long-term partners and, all those kinds of things. We're going to be talking about all that stuff. And like I said, I want to show people that you can like masculine and feminine gender roles, but you also don't have to do it the way everyone says that you do. All right. I think there's certain parameters that exist for everything, but I think also, like my grandpa used to do the vacuuming because vacuums back then were big and heavy and metal. And my grandma was a tiny lady. She was like 5'2", 110 pounds, So, my grandpa was happy to do that to make her life easier. And, also my grandma did all the bookkeeping because she was better at it. And yeah, my grandpa, I don't think he wrote a check for like 30 years straight, before they were retired. And sometimes he just needed to do so because she wasn't around. But, she managed all the money. So again, but at the same time, like my grandma also was not going to go, change her oil filter and change her oil on her car, like not in a million years. And my papa also did not do his, he didn't have to do his laundry. My grandma would take care of that. So that's what I want to show people is that, 50s couples aren't everything that you think. And I just want to talk about, I just have a passion for gender dynamics and, I just think here's the last thing I'll say in this intro video, which is that I've noticed in modern times we tend to throw away tradition just because it's tradition. Just because, well, that's a thing people used to do. And that's not a thing we need to do anymore because we're elevated, we're woke, right? We understand. We've seen through all the conspiracy. But I'm here to tell you, if you do relationships right and you understand what love really means and also understand female and male, feminine and masculine dynamics, I promise you that you will see whole different sides to men or to women or relationships that you've never seen before. And so really excited to be on this journey and to tell my story, my many stories, and to tell people what I think about this issue. And anyways, drop me a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you want to hear about. Tell me things that you want to hear discussed, and I'll go on a little rant about it. So, all right, y'all have a good one.